All right, welcome everybody to the webinar on health and student hunger. I'm going to introduce first we have up our executive director, Marlene Garcia. Marlene.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a briefing on the California Student Aid Commission's CalFresh report, Proper Nutrition Equals College Success, Making CalFresh Work for Students. This report was developed in collaboration with the CalFresh work group. And these work group members, I have to thank so much, which this work could not have been made possible without their numerous insights and contributions. So thank you so much to the work group members, three of whom you'll be hearing from in just a moment. College student hunger is real and has only grown worse in California and the country, especially since the onset of the pandemic. We have heard directly from students who say they eat only once a day to reduce their food costs. In a recent Hope Center report, one student said, "If I'm hungry, the last thing I worry about is my physics class." In 2019, just before COVID, 1 in 3 students experienced food insecurity in any given month in California. And just after the pandemic hit, the commission did a follow-up survey, and 7 out of 10 students reported that they had lost some or all of their income. Many students, especially Black and Latino students, indicated that they were having great difficulty meeting their basic needs. Sadly, the basic needs crisis is a major factor in causing so many students to drop out of college today. We have seen enrollments plummet, especially among those lowest income students. And this has become even worse since the pandemic. This is not just a California concern. This is a national crisis. College students have access to one of the largest federal anti-poverty nutrition program in the world, called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP. And in California, we call it CalFresh. But this program is not accessible for the majority of California students living in poverty. As many as 700,000 California college students are estimated to be living at the poverty line, but only 127,000 of them, or 18%, actually receives CalFresh benefits. This is according to a report issued by the Department of Social Services in 2020. In the fall of 2020, the California Student Aid Commission convened the CalFresh work group to address this low take-up rate by college students. The work group took an in-depth look at the college student experience when navigating the CalFresh process and took a human-centered design approach in analyzing the problem and developing policy solutions. The goal for this work group, pure and simple, was to recommend policy solutions that increase college student access to CalFresh nutrition benefits by modernizing and streamlining the system and making the system much more accessible to college students. The work group was unique in that it was comprised of a diverse group of stakeholders, including experts from social services, higher education, local county eligibility workers, and of course, students. Each of these stakeholders brought a different perspective to the discussion, which led to often very lively, robust conversations on how to solve for this problem. And there were challenges identified at every step of the process for students. The issues are complex and require cross-sectional solutions at the state, federal, and local county levels of government, as well as at colleges and university. This is what makes the issue so complex. The report gets at the core of what changes are needed and recommends policy and administrative solutions to be adopted at each of these levels. Most people believe this is only a federal problem. And yes, there are many issues that must be addressed at the federal level. However, there are many changes we can make at the state and local levels to make it easier and more accessible for students to gain access to these benefits. We must take combined responsibility for making these food benefits available to the growing number of students living in poverty. They cannot succeed in college if they're going hungry. It's just not very likely that they can persist. They are the backbone to our future economy and workforce. We can't afford to lose them because they can't afford to meet their basic needs. So this report is a call to action to California and the country to make the needed changes to the CalFresh SNAP program. The system is in dire need of modernization and streamlining, and is a critical strategy to increase college success and our skilled workplace. Before I introduce our special guest, I want to take this opportunity to thank the College Futures Foundation in collaboration with the Foundation for California Community Colleges for their generous support for this work. And I also want to thank WestEd for facilitating the work group and drafting the final report. Now it's my great honor and privilege to introduce Congressman Jimmy Gomez. Congressman Jimmy Gomez represents the 34th Congressional District and serves the people of Northeast Los Angeles. He has served in the House of Representatives since 2017, and prior to that served in the California Assembly, which is when I first met Congressman Jimmy Gomez. Congressman Gomez has introduced the all-important EATS Act, or the Enhanced Access to SNAP Act, which representatives, along with Representatives Harder and Panetta, this would permanently expand the SNAP eligibility to students who attend college at least part-time by amending the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008 to include attending an institution of higher education as a form of qualification that would work. He has worked on expanding access to CalFresh benefits for students for many, many years and has been a longtime advocate. And we're thrilled to have him here with us this afternoon. And for him, it's evening. Thank you so much for sharing a part of your evening with us. And to kick off this conversation, making CalFresh work for students. But I also wanted to point out that Congressman Gomez attended Riverside Community College before receiving his BA in political science from UCLA, and then moved on to Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. He is really a living example of someone who has come through the system and has risen to the highest levels of leadership in our country. And I do have one question before I turn it over to you, Congressman Jimmy Gomez. Were you by any chance a Cal Grant recipient or a Pell Grant recipient?
I was.
All right. Well, we're going to have to feature you as our successful Cal Grant alumni group that has really made a difference in this world as a result of hopefully Cal Grant and success in your college endeavors. So thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts from your perspective at the federal level.
No, thank you so much for that introduction. And I just want to thank, of course, everyone who's participating in the webinar and all the panelists. I want to thank the California Student Aid Commission and of course the CalFresh work group for putting together this timely report to address the need of student hunger. As a first generation college student and community college transfer students, as it was mentioned, I just know firsthand how important a higher education is to opening doors. But I also know how expensive it can be and how food security is a serious problem on college campuses across the nation. The pandemic has, I think, only exacerbated a lot of problems we had before, as people have seen, and student hunger is one of them. So accessing critical nutrition on campus is a matter of equity for college students. College students are more likely to experience food and basic needs insecurity. And the people who are more likely to experience that are low income, first generation, Black and Indigenous, and those who identify as LGBTQ. It's hard to, as people say, it's hard to learn when you're worrying about where you're going to get your next meal, or where you're going to live, how you're going to make the rent, how you're going to just survive. When you're worrying about those basic needs, that's what your attention is focused on. We know when students are nourished and their grades and mental health improve, we know that they see and have less stress. And then when they do have stress, they can handle it better. So we can support students by, of course, increasing access to CalFresh, but college students do not, as mentioned before, typically qualify for SNAP unless they're eligible for an exemption, which includes working 20 hours per week or participating in a federal or state work study. On top of that, of attending college at least half time. The pandemic further revealed how counterproductive these rules are, as students lost their jobs near a campus or work study opportunities, but they still have the same requirements. The report's findings are just exemplify how outdated the systems are and how complex student eligibility rules have hampered CalFresh's ability to adequately address student basic needs. This Congress, Senator Jill Brown and I introduced the Enhanced Access to SNAP or EATS Act to permanently remove barriers for work for food rules, or what they call work for food rules. This will make CalFresh more accessible to low-income college students who would otherwise be eligible for the benefit, and eliminate the burdensome paperwork requirements for student and agency staff. But breaking down barriers for students doesn't stop there. I got a host of policy recommendations to take back with me, and I think that you guys have done an excellent job. One of the things that I like to put a face to this crisis, and that it's been around for a long, long time. A friend of mine who is worked here in Washington, D.C. She worked for Harry Reid, so in the Senate Majority Leader back a few years ago. She's had a distinguished career of giving back, and also now works for a large corporation. And she sent me a text. She said, "Your hashtag Eats Act brought tears to my eyes. I've never been hungrier than when I was in college, working full-time to pay my tuition and help my mom/brother. Had to drink water to make my stomach not growl in class. Thank you, Jimmy," with a heart. Personal friend of mine who can send that. But think about that there's folks that are stretched so thin, and they know that college could give them the different life that they want, and the opportunities that they want, and they can help their own family out, that they're willing to quell their hunger pains by drinking water, right? And then probably taking whatever money they had extra, putting it towards food and rent for their siblings. And for their parents. So that text let me know that this is something that was going on years before, but it's still going on now. And if we make certain changes in our policy that focus on equity, removing some of these rules, we can have a dramatic impact on when it comes to ending food insecurity, when it comes to people being hungry. And it is possible, but we have to make different decisions. And I think that's taking into account a lot of the recommendations, not only the SNAP Act, the enhanced, the EATS Act, which I introduced, but also some of the recommendations that the working group for CalFresh have put together. I think those are great ideas, and we should look at them and see if we can implement them at the federal level. With that, I want to just thank all of you for continuing this work. There are a lot of people out there who might not be in the situation any longer, but are now in positions of authority and influence that could have a major impact on getting this legislation passed. So with that, I will yield back to the panel. Have a good presentation, and I look forward to seeing if we can take some of these recommendations and turn them into law.
Thank you very much, Congressman Gomez. Your comments have really set the stage for our panel discussion today and highlighted how important and urgent this is. So thank you very much. All right. First, we had a request for the closed captionings. We did turn those on. So thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. It wasn't activated. And for the next half hour, we're going to hear from our 4 panelists that will address how access to CalFresh benefits impact students, the Health and Human Services Agency, and higher education, and how the work from the work group and its recommendations can begin to address those problems. All of the panels, as Marlene mentioned, were members of the work group from which the report and recommendations are based. First, we have Jasmine Prasad. She will be speaking to the student experience. Jasmine is a Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. Jasmine is also currently a student at both Folsom Lake Community College and San Francisco State University. Welcome to Jasmine. Next up, we have Nolan Sullivan. Nolan has worked for Yolo County Health and Human Services for the last 15 years and was recently named interim director. He and his team have a passion for providing innovative and creative ways to enhance the CalFresh mission and advancing eligibility. Yolo County is a host of local community colleges and UC Davis, and knows firsthand the seasonal surges that occur, and we're early collaborators on Get CalFresh's student portal. So welcome, Nolan. Thank you. Next up, we have Ruben Canedo. He serves as Director of Strategic Equity Initiatives at UC Berkeley, as well as having been the chair of the UC Berkeley Basic Needs Committee and co-chair of the UC System-Wide Basic Needs Committee. Beyond the work they are doing with the UC system, they are the founder and facilitator of the California Higher Education Basic Needs Alliance, or CHEBNA, that unites and coordinates basic needs efforts across all the campuses and statewide offices of California public higher education segments. Welcome, Ruben. And finally, from the Commission, Jake Brenner. Jake is our Director of Government and External Relations here. Prior to becoming director, he served at the as state and federal policy director for the Campaign for College Opportunities. Welcome, Jake. Thank you all for being here. And now we are going to jump into some questions that we have for each of you. First, moving to Jasmine. Jasmine, let me get my questions up. How are campuses and services linked together and helping to limit the number of times students must declare or prove they are in need?
Yeah, so this is actually a really great question. The SSCCC actually supported some legislation that would help out with this concern, just making students more aware of what CalFresh is and how they can obtain access to it. Before joining the group, I didn't even know what CalFresh was, let alone I didn't know I qualified for it. So after, getting more aware and telling other students like, hey, do you know about this program? If you're facing food insecurity, it's a big issue that arises to so many students across all three sectors. So just making them more aware of the resources they have is extremely important. And I know a lot of colleges are trying to do that, especially in light of the pandemic. The legislature also realized, students are struggling with their basic need necessities, and they really listen to the administrations and students more, how can we make this more accessible to them and provide more resources?
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Next, we have Nolan from the Health and Human Services perspective. Given the surges that occur each fall, what would make the greatest impact for those processing the applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wanted to give a little background here for folks in case they're not CalFresh experts or kind of, depending on their level of background. So first and foremost is that, CalFresh, the number of stakeholders that are involved in the process are many, and it's super complicated, and there's layers and there's all these different parties. So the first part about this discussion is you have multiple players at the government level, you have multiple universities, multiple community colleges, and all these different groups trying to get on the same page. CalFresh is ultimately sponsored at the federal level by the USDA through a program called SNAP that rolls down into California. So every state handles their programs a little different. In California, the 58 counties actually service the CalFresh recipients individually in their respective counties. You have 58 agencies with 58 teams with 58 sets of regulations working with all of the college campuses in their 58 counties. And so first you have to understand there's just so many people that are involved in this process, and it gets kind of convoluted and confusing. The second piece of that is that student populations can be large or small depending on the county. And so some counties may have an enhanced focus on students. Some counties, it may not even be on the radar. Yolo County, yes, that is our real name, happens to have the largest student population to overall county ratio in the entire state of California. So out of 58 counties, about 16% of our overall population are college students. And so we have a much deeper and kind of greater stake in really looking at ways to expand eligibility of this population. Not saying that other counties don't, but it's just been a very pronounced issue for us. To put things in perspective, so Little Yolo County, we've got about 217,000 people. On a monthly basis, we carry about 900 CalFresh applications. So I've got a team of a couple hundred that service CalFresh and Medi-Cal and other programs. Our normal load is 900, right? So that doesn't mean 900 come in. That just means that's our average caseload that we're sort of carrying in terms of applications to process. To put things in perspective, though, so when the students in the UC system and community college start coming back for the school year, right around August or so, that jumps up to 3,200. So we go from 900 consistently throughout the year to about 3,200 in the month of August. That carries through September, and then typically drops off in October, although we're not seeing that this year. So we have a 300% increase in workload for 3 months out of the year. So as you can imagine, in any of your workplaces, if all of a sudden your workload tripled in a single month or two, it's an impossible thing to deal with. Our staff call it the CalFresh tsunami. So some of the issues that we see, is just the sheer volume of applications that come through. The things that would really be helpful, I think, for local county CalFresh offices, and mostly importantly for students, is to really kind of clarify and streamline the process. Unfortunately, our students also have one of the highest denial rates. And a lot of times that's because the application process is so confusing. As was mentioned earlier on in the conversation, students are one of the only groups that are categorically exempt from CalFresh. So you have to meet one of about a dozen different exemptions to actually even qualify for the program. So it's an extremely laborious process. And so I think the more that we can work with college campuses, with advocates, with application screeners and third-party CBOs to really get applications that are as complete as possible, help walk students through the process, and really help kind of help counties along through this workload, the more likely is we're going to get students on CalFresh. And so again, the way the applications come in generally is a huge load. And oftentimes, it just totally washes out counties. So the more we can streamline the process, the more we can communicate, the more we can automate. We have a lot of this information already in the Fafsa or other systems. Why are we asking students to share this information 4 or 5 different times? Just give it to the counties, right? So the more we can streamline the process and make it easier for students, make it easier for counties, the more food we put on plates.
Amazing. Thank you, Nolan. Next up, we have Ruben Canedo. Ruben, what obstacles does higher education face when addressing food insecurity and other basic needs?
Yeah, great question. So I think for me, something that comes up is the biggest challenge is that higher education right now needs to do a cultural shift towards centering student basic needs. When we think about the metrics of success of higher education, we think about what? Of access, affordability, retention, persistence, performance, and graduation rates. Those tend to be the performance metrics that chancellors are measured for, or presidents, VPs, vice chancellors. Like, that's what it all comes down about. Obviously, there's a glorification of resourcing that. So the donors, the government contracts, all that. But what is it really about? Access, affordability, persistence, retention, performance, and graduation. But we're not there yet where we understand that basic needs, students' health and well-being are essential factors that contribute to all of those performance metrics. Luckily, over the last 7 years as California, and this is a huge shout out to our community college, to our CSU, to our UC, to the advocacy community, to CSAC, all of us have changed the culture of us coming together and really create a coordinated strategy that is interdependent, that is informing the field to help folks understand that all of the data that we're producing up to this point confirms that students who are challenged in their basic needs consistently have lower rates across all of the success metrics of higher education. And students who have their basic needs met consistently have higher rates across all metrics of success for higher education. Therefore, higher education has to transition to say that the success of higher education is intrinsically connected with the experience of basic needs of students. When we meet the needs of students, they have better opportunities to have better access, to be able to afford, to retain, to persist, to perform, and to complete their higher education degree. So I think that culture shift and moving in that direction is going to change the game. I would love for chancellors and vice chancellors to be held accountable. Hey, this is great, but did students leave your institution healthier? Did we meet their basic needs while they were there? And did they feel cared for? Because the better that we care for our students, the better that they can then go and care for the communities after they graduate.
Well, yes, all that, yes. Thank you, Ruben. Jake is going to kind of give us a few snapshots of some of the recommendations and how they tie back to some of the points raised by our panelists. Jake Bremner.
Well, thank you, Alex. And my colleagues here on the panel have totally teed me up to walk through some of the recommendations that are reflected in our report. And really, we hope set a vision for some long-term policies that we can pursue that are going to put students' needs at the center and how we serve them, not only in the higher education sector, but how we can serve them with these other forms of support. And my colleagues have hit on some of the issues that we need to address here. Of course, we must remove the barriers that specifically make it challenging for students to apply for CalFresh, and that our partners at the county, Nolan and his team at YOLO and all of the other 57 counties here in California have to contest with. So we have to eliminate the student rule, as it's called at the federal level, and allow students to not have to have this extra burden of proof just to apply for CalFresh. But then going beyond that, as you've heard from my fellow panelists here, there are other unique pieces about students as a population that say we can't just remove barriers, we have to build bridges to make it easier for them to access this kind of support. Our county partners are dealing with those surges of seasonal applications when students enroll and show up in a new county. That creates a unique challenge we need to look at how we address. We also know that students are often, this is their first time they're navigating this kind of social services system. They don't have the same kind of familiarity that we adults, adults, of course, our students are adults too, but those of us who have a few more years of experience may have dealt with these systems before. And then additionally, we know that we're already asking students to share their financial aid information. And to the point that Ruben just made about belongingness on campus and how we help make students feel like their basic needs are part of how we understand their success, is it really going to help a student who's arriving to a new county, which creates a whole other issue, but maybe they're moving away from home? Is it really helpful if we ask them again, hey, can you remind me that you're low income and you need more support and that you could use some help? That's not really the kind of campus climate that we know helps a student feel part of a community and that they can be successful. So what do we do to address these issues and to help design a food support program and CalFresh benefit that can be responsive to those needs? Of course, we eliminate the student role. We allow students to apply for CalFresh without extra burdens of proof. Beyond that, though, we also know that we already are getting their information through the Fafsa, the free application for federal student aid. We should use that to help with recertification when students 6 months after getting their benefit have to go back and prove that, again, they still qualify for this support. Why aren't we using the other kinds of data that we have available to us to do that? And then beyond that, we should also be looking at how we use that to inform eligibility in the first place. Do we really need to have a secondary application when we know students are already giving us this data? So there's a lot that we can do at the federal level that takes changes of law and changes of regulation. But that being said, we know that California can also continue to lead the way in what we're doing to address student basic needs, as our state is really proud to do. There are a couple opportunities reflected in our report as pilot program recommendations for some means of really trying something new and showing the rest of the country that, yes, we can do better by our students and help connect them to this support. We can look at the gaps that many in our state face when they try to access this program in the first place, and that there are thousands of immigrant and undocumented families and individuals who can't get this support just because of their documentation status. We know there is some important work being led by the Food for All Coalition to help make a food support benefit available to these families. We think that for students who are already submitting the California DREAM Act application, they're already sharing their information with the state agency. Let's look at the opportunity to use that data to understand if that student is eligible for this form of other support through the California Food Assistance Program. And that helps us show the federal government that this use of a financial aid application for purposes of a food benefit is possible and it's going to work. We also think that we can look at opportunities to change the way that we process student applications at that county level, and learning from other programs administered by our counties where they've created regional hubs where we could forward student applications to a regional hub serving several counties with a specially designated team of county workers who are getting support and training around how to process those complicated student applications, and then can receive the application, process it, send it back to that student's county of residence so that there's a more streamlined process for both the student and for the county. in getting that benefit out to the students. So a lot more that I could cover here, but I'm going to pass it back to you, Alex, and my fellow panelists.
Thanks, Jake. We are going to go back to Jasmine for kind of a next round and start with ways that there might be ways an immediate impact can really influence how students access food and other benefits. So Jasmine, what changes or assistance would help students access food, like potentially like next term? Like what would that look like to you?
Yeah, so Jake and a couple other panelists touched on this a little bit, but just making the eligibility requirements stay how it currently is, because we're in the middle of the pandemic. So with Jimmy Gomez SNAP Act, it has been extremely beneficial to so many students because they get the amount on their EBT cards, and that allows a lot of students who are struggling financially to also pay for their groceries, because, you know, when we get taxed and we have to pay bills, that doesn't still mean that we have a lot of extra money to buy groceries. And that's something that the government doesn't always realize, especially for a lot of college students. So we have that full amount, and we increase the eligibility right now for also Pell Grant recipients, such as myself, to receive it. It's extremely beneficial to those lower income students. And then also, as Jay and Nolan kind of mentioned, just making sure there aren't a lot of application processes that the student has to constantly go through when applying for CalFresh. Just because I know, and I went through the process, they were just asking me for a ton of things over the phone, and it's hard to remember that when you're in the middle of classes and finals and midterms and everything, but just constantly having to renew it every year. And then also with the amount of casework that every county has to go through, eventually adds up, and they can't get to every student in time, which, you know, makes it a barrier for them to obtain their EBT. And not that's the county's fault at all. It's just that there's so many applications going through. So we definitely need to streamline the process and make it more easier for both parties, so they have less applicants to go through, since students don't have to keep reapplying. And then also students can receive EBT cards faster. But a lot of it just has to do with making sure that the federal government, you know, keeps it how it currently is with the SNAPS Act, and making sure that we can use the information through FAFSA. I know that's something we've been trying to push for on the state level. A lot of legislators are interested in that, as well as, you know, just using that data and automatically letting them know if they qualify for CalFresh, so we can get more students to secure their food necessities if they're facing any struggles around that.
Thank you, Jasmine. Nolan, what would Health and Human Services need to make an impact in the low number of eligible students currently receiving CalFresh benefits?
That's a great question, and I know we have 2 or 3 minutes, so I'm going to do my best to condense a lot into that time frame. I think, you know, Nolan's magic wand would be, first and foremost, is change the archaic and punitive federal regulations. They just don't make sense. They're ridiculous. They need to be adjusted at the federal level. And so happy to have the congressman on here today. You know, first and foremost, that needs to happen. You know, while we all wait for that to happen, or kind of hold our breath, unfortunately, I think we have to take matters into our own hands locally. And I think, you know, college students, part of the problem counties have is tracking denial status by student type is very difficult for us. So it's hard to pull exact data. But it looks like, at least in Yolo County, the student denial rate is probably over double sort of the average normal population's denial rate. There's a couple of different reasons there, and everything is driven by complexity, right? So the complexity of applying, finding the exemptions, all of the different rules and changes. What happens is, you know, the complexity leads to frustration and confusion amongst students. And then what happens there is you get sort of this rumor mill, right? So one student in the dormitory says, oh, I applied, students can't get it because they didn't fully understand the complexity of why they were denied. And all of a sudden, all of their flatmates on that floor aren't going to apply for CalFresh, or that rumor mill starts to kind of go out of control. And so oftentimes we find ourselves sort of doing this misinformation battle and really trying to kind of figure out ways to convince students to apply, to really address, you know, the root cause of finding those exemptions and really figuring out what we need to do. We call it the exemption Easter egg hunt, right? So my staff have to figure out how to find one of these exemptions to help get this student to possibly apply for CalFresh. We spend tons of time going back and forth with these students who have no idea what their base family income is, or all these key variables that we're asking them on a CalFresh application in many cases. The Student Financial Aid Office has that information, right? we have the eligibility information. So you've got the higher education system with all of the information, or at least 90% of the information we need. You've got the social services system looking for that information. I think the one interesting thing about this discussion is everybody involved wants more students on CalFresh, right? The students want the CalFresh, the UCs want more students on CalFresh, the advocates want students to have CalFresh, the farmers, the food producers want more students on CalFresh, and the counties have a mission to get students on CalFresh. So I think locally what we have to do is build partnerships, build pilots, and build projects where we share information to identify the largest pool of eligible students and help them through that process. The other thing, just to throw in really quickly, I think we need to treat student hunger like a natural disaster, right? Like the pandemic that it really is, right? So COVID-19 did some crazy stuff, right? So COVID-19, there were some major eligibility realignments and changes that were made to help students get on CalFresh. Namely, they boiled the bulk of the exemptions down to 2 key exemptions that really helped a significant amount of students get on CalFresh. The same student hunger issues and challenges students were facing in February of 2020 are the same ones they will be facing in August of 2022, right? So why can't we treat this like the pandemic that it is? Why can't we treat this like the natural disaster that it is? And really put some emphasis on making sure students have full plates, sharing information together, and working together to make sure students have the resources that they need. So again, I think that to boil down the answer to your question, it really is data. It's data, it's sharing, and it's the will to make a difference in students' lives and partner together to get this done.
Thank you, Nolan. Ruben, what changes do you see as being the best way to impact the crisis in the immediate future?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And Nolan, I always appreciate how you communicate, bro, and the way that you answer these questions, because there's so much that gets presented to community of things being too hard to understand and too complex to do anything about it. And you always bring it down to make it accessible and to center us. And like, actually, there's a lot of things that we can do about it. So I appreciate that sets up this question, because it's very important that we lift today the fact that U.S. Representative Jimmy Gomez is here with us, because that is one of the answers, right? Like us moving the EAT Act forward and making sure that we get that done immediately, because every day that we're not doing that, there are hundreds of students per campus across the country, if not thousands, who are experiencing the harm of poverty and hunger because of things that they had no business being negatively impacted by, right? And it's a disservice, and we are failing them. So I wanna bring the energy together and continue to encourage our community to move the energy towards the EAT Act. And I also want to really lift that it was absolutely incredible and an honor for CSAC, because of who CSAC is, to dedicate a work group to this conversation. For so many years, we tried to do this. Nolan and I were at multiple conferences where we were showing up, and sometimes people thought that we were crying wolf. But in every conversation that we were in, it was standing room only. It was absolutely packed, because the people that are at the ground level holding the responsibility of doing this work through this, things that are ridiculous and makes no sense, as much as hearing the trauma and the harm of students who are experiencing poverty and hunger, just made no sense that we were trying to do something about it. So I really celebrate CSAC making this investment, and the recommendations that are there are coming from that ground level, are coming from the multiple ground levels that are informing this work to create an ecosystem. I'm also really excited that finally we have everybody understanding how absolutely essential the data infrastructure is. Let me make this very clear, y'all. It is on the higher education side to ensure that we are outreaching and educating our students about applying for CalFresh. And we're there. CSAC is sending confirmations and verification letters. Our financial aid offices are doing it the same. Our campus teams working on CalFresh are doing the outreach and application support, but we have no idea what is going on in the outcome side of it. We have no idea how long it takes for applications to be processed, why they get denied, who's denying them, what is the gap of education and training for us to intervene, how do we support the counties that are struggling the most, because there's other counties who are doing phenomenal. So what's going on over there? As soon as we have this data infrastructure where we know what's going on, we're going to be able to support each other so much. I hope that there are county community members here so that they hear from me. We love y'all. We appreciate y'all. We know how ridiculous the workload is, and we're trying to do everything possible to support you all as much as we're trying to make sure that we're supporting the students. This is not about competing with each other. This is not about pointing fingers. This is not about blaming. This is about us coming together, because the state of California is second to last in enrollment of CalFresh, where we are #1 and potentially eligible people in the country. Imagine the dollars that need to be coming into our local economies to support our mom and pops, our college students, and their loved ones when we resource them in that way. That's the California that we believe in, and that's the California that we're working towards. And we know that what we're doing here will support the rest of the states across the country. So please support the EATS Act. Let's please bring ourselves together, and let's make sure that we're moving towards implementing these recommendations in the report.
Amazing, Ruben. Thank you. Such a great call to action. I love it. We're going to wrap up the panelists with Jake. He's going to kind of go over some of the short-term recommendations we have that piggyback to what our panelists are all mentioning. Jake.
And this is such an amazing panel to be on. The only challenge is going last and going after speakers like Jasmine, Nolan, and Ruben. But I'm happy to highlight some of these short-term, immediate opportunities that my fellow panelists have just been speaking to, and where we know, actually, in addition to Congressman Gomez fighting for students, fighting for these changes at the federal level, there are opportunities that are already moving forward here in Sacramento and California for us to start to track student participation in CalFresh and leverage data for outreach. So I have to first, to harken back to what Ruben was just speaking to, heard a colleague here at the Student Aid Commission say recently, you can't manage what you can't measure. We have to have more data about student participation and access to the CalFresh program. That's fundamental to understanding how all of these other changes are moving the needle in student access and understanding the workload that our county partners are absorbing from those student applications that we're generating. We also know that we can then use data to help inform outreach and to make it easier for our campus partners like Ruben and his colleagues to understand if students are going to be eligible, and then to let them know, hey, it looks like you're eligible and you should go apply for CalFresh. So there's legislation by Senator Nancy Skinner, there's legislation by Assemblymember Joaquin Arambula that would both look at how we can track data in the case of the Senate legislation, and also look at how our campuses can utilize financial aid application data to let students know that they may be eligible for CalFresh and that they should go apply. Beyond that, we've also laid out at the Student Aid Commission a recommendation for using data that we get from our K-12 partners for students who are qualifying for free and reduced price meals while they're at the K-12 system. We can use that data to understand, as those students are moving from our K-12 system and moving into higher education, it's very likely that they are still going to qualify for CalFresh, even if where they're enrolled and attending has changed. We should use that data to help inform our outreach strategies. And of course, to bring it back to that federal level where we know we can do so much to change the landscape for all of these efforts that we're pursuing here in California, we have to pass the EATS Act, as Ruben was speaking to, and support Congressman Gomez's work. We also can look for more of those exemption Easter eggs that Nolan spoke to. We currently, if we look at some of the expanded access during the pandemic, students who have a zero expected family contribution, students who qualify for federal work study, that those are exemptions right now that will go away at a certain point. We should make those permanent. There's no reason that they need to go away. We should use those as access points as we work toward eliminating that student rule. And then in addition to that, something that we at the Student Aid Commission have been talking about with our partners, we know we're not the only state dealing with this. This is an issue across the country. And while Ruben noted, we have a lot of ground that we can make up here in California, we know there are going to be other partners in other parts of this country who want to help join the chorus and want to help us explain to members of Congress and the administration why these changes are so important. So we need to mobilize not only here in California, but nationally and develop that coalition. And we at the Student Aid Commission are ready and eager to help be part of that change and that work. So thank you all for joining today. And I think we'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Jake. I think that's going to wrap up the panel conversation, and I wanted to check in with any of our attendees, see if there's any questions. Please use the raise your hand feature, or you can drop it in the chat and we will begin to answer them. And if you have somebody specific you want to answer the question, please let us know. I see one. I'm going to start this out maybe with Jake, but what are the pros and cons we might encounter if using the FAFSA to determine student eligibility? The concern being, I mean, you can read also that what's in the chat, but seeing what the other concerns are.
I think the major pro there is that we're streamlining the experience for students and not asking them to apply in multiple places. And I think particularly for the undocumented students I mentioned before, we already do so much work to earn their trust, to inspire confidence about how they share their data with a government agency. That can be a really scary thing for an undocumented and mixed student or mixed status household where their parents might be undocumented. We shouldn't ask them to go through that process twice. We should use the data that we already received to inform whether they qualify for state financial aid and whether they would qualify for a state-funded food access benefit. You know, there is an issue with the FAFSA sometimes, in that it uses what's called prior year data, and it may not be reflective of students' experiences in that moment. But that being said, there are already opportunities where students can update their financial aid information, can go to their campus and say, actually, I've had a change in circumstance, and where they can get that information updated. So I think that's something we of course want to be mindful of, but where we can work through that. And of course, I think the big issue here is that with this all takes federal policy change to use that information from something like an application for student aid to understand if the student's eligible for the CalFresh benefit.
And Nolan, did you want to address it as well?
Yeah, I think just to add on to that really quick, you know, students from the county's perspective have the added challenge of just being able to apply for CalFresh, right? So using information from the FAFSA or other higher ed sources really first answers the question, should the student apply? Will they most likely just even have the ability to apply first and foremost? Because that's the biggest hurdle to sort of approach first, and that also creates the most misinformation. And then secondly, you know, the income data and the other data that's on that form would help inform the actual application process. So by using that information, even though it's not perfect, you first narrow down kind of your pool, and then you also provide, you know, a couple extra steps and boost the eligibility process, which could really speed things along. So for counties, this is one of the biggest challenges, right? Is can the student even apply first and foremost, right? That's the biggest number one question we have to answer. And then the question is, you know, all of the other regular application procedures. So for us, this could be a game changer. And again, it's, you know, it's not quite categorical eligibility or something like that, but it really gets us closer to in the ballpark. And I think that is one of the biggest frustrations right now on the county side. And it also causes the most heartache, headache, and confusion for college students when they're told to apply randomly without sort of, you know, some crux or basis as to why they should do that.
Thank you, Nolan and Jake. I believe we had a question in the question and answer box. I can't actually see it. Oh, how soon will the recording be sent out for those who are unable to make it? That is a very good question. I would imagine beginning of next week, we'll be able to get something out with maybe a couple of our resources and including the report again, in case you would like to see it again. I think we're actually, thank you for the panelists and for all the questions. I'm now going to turn it back over to the Commission's Executive Director, Marlene Garcia, to close us out this afternoon. Marlene.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I really want to thank our panelists and our amazing panelists and our amazing guest, Congressman Jimmy Gomez, for these inspiring, insightful, and really passionate call to help students who are struggling so much, especially since the pandemic. I just, having looked at this issue we've been looking at it for the past year and a half, And as we delve more deeply into the issue, we realize it has reached crisis proportions. And these are students who are already trying to just have a better life, and that working together, especially because it involves so many sectors of our government, so many colleges and universities, we have to do this together. But I think fundamentally what we heard from our panelists is that, yes, we've got to know what that solution is. We've got to work from a place of data and analysis, but we have to also bring the humanity and understand, who these students are that are trying so hard to get that college education. But most importantly, we have to have the will to change. We have to have the will to do things differently, even though we may not exactly know what it's going to look like at the back end, but we've got to take that first step, and we've got to take a chance that we're living in this moment of disruption, of disequilibrium. Let's take this moment and let's really do it differently, and let's try to solve for this serious problem. And I'm just so grateful for all of you for having the commitment to this issue, and all of those of you on this webinar. Please take it out to your networks, and let's make this a call to action, because this is a national problem, and it's one that California recognizes that it's time for us to really do things differently. So thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to many more conversations about this important topic, and have a great day.